Hi everyone, this is the first meeting of the Positive and Bit-Free Horse Group. I can't tell you how delighted I am that you are here and that you are interested in finding out about training horses using approaches which are aligned with the 5 domains framework and principles based on the emotional and physical well-being of horses. And that is the most important starting point. Why are we here? Well, I suspect like you either know or wonder if there's been a better way to train horses. My name is Sarah and I own Forageplus in the UK. As well as being an expert in hoof health and nutrition, I also spend my time training 5 horses using reward-based training. The photo shows me and my horse Gatsby a few years ago, before we began our bit-free journey. I had started a bit of positive reinforcement, but it was fairly unsuccessful, and I would constantly feel that he was rushing and that I had no brakes. To put it mildly, it always felt a bit hairy doing anything with him, really. He demonstrated a lot of anxiety, and really it was this that led me to question what I was doing with him. So I've developed my skills over the last 5 years, gradually moving from a pressure-based and bitted training system to where I am now, which has basically undone just about everything I paid an enormous amount of money to learn over the last 30 years. Underpinning this change is the recognition that many of the problems I had were because I had not been taught about the horse as a sentient animal with emotions of fear, confusion and frustration, which lead to behaviour which creates challenges for them and us. However, this group is not about me. It's about us. It is about people who are prepared to be free-thinking individuals and abandon horse training beliefs which have been shown in science to be wrong and not in the best interests of the horse. I try to live by the saying, today's information is quite possibly tomorrow's misinformation. And as a struggling horse rider, equestrian misinformation has duped me on many occasions. You can probably relate to that. I would also like to make it very clear that I am just an obsessed horse owner who is passionate about horses, curious, prepared to give things a go, prepared to abandon things which are obviously not working, and learn by self-directed doing. So this evening I will try to share information which I hope will both inspire and help you get started, or help you keep going, or maybe you know better than me and we can come back in May and review how things are working and how we might build upon what is discussed this evening, because knowledge and the path to a better way with horses should never be static, and neither should skills. These topics are huge, and we could spend days, if not months, covering each one. So I'll cover each one briefly, trying to give as much practical tips and information as possible. Then over the next year, we can aim to revisit areas which are identified as needing further exploration and look at the science these approaches are based on. I am sure I'll miss things out and gloss over important things because I only have a short time to speak to you. But as this is the start of a movement, then I'll just do my best to give you information which starts the journey of us supporting each other. So what I'll cover briefly is using positive reinforcement correctly so that you get the motivation and the engagement to unlock a door of possibilities that, if you've never done this before, will astound you. And then what groundwork and foundational behaviours will help you to take your horse bitless. What do you need to develop your confidence to do that? Many people don't have the confidence to take the bit out of their horse's mouth, and that actually prevents them exploring and finding out what happens when you do. And then there are a lot of bit-free bridles out there, so how do you choose the best one and how do you transition to that? And then how do you learn to apply positive reinforcement to ridden work so that you can build the connection and the softness and the trust and the relaxation with good brakes, good steering and good control, which doesn't start from a bit that causes pain. So we need to start with learning theory overview. First, all horse owners need to understand that behaviour is explained by what's called learning theory. It's a way of describing how behaviour changes, and there are two branches. Classical conditioning, where, for example, a horse might associate the smell of a vet with fear. So they start worrying before the vet even gets near them, being tense, fidgeting, maybe refusing to be caught and often trying to leave. They've learnt through association, classical conditioning, that the vet arriving means discomfort and fear. The famous example of this is Pavlov's dogs, who learnt that when a bell was rung, food would come. So the bell would be rung and they would start salivating and drooling straight away. But we can use the other branch, operant conditioning, learning through consequences, to shape a new feeling about the vet using targeted intervention to train a different feeling about the arrival of that vet. Creating this more desirable behaviour is about understanding the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning and harnessing the power of positive reinforcement. When I first came across this grid here, I found it really, really difficult to understand the difference between each one of the quadrants. And I found it difficult to understand what was positive reinforcement, what was positive punishment, what was negative reinforcement, and what was negative punishment. But as I've used positive reinforcement and experienced how much it changes the everyday problems we encounter with horses, each quadrant has become more obvious in terms of how they make horses feel and therefore behave. Don't see negative as bad and positive as good. That's a common misconception, that negative means bad, positive means good. All these words is negative is taking something away and positive is adding something. So with positive reinforcement, we add something pleasant so the behaviour increases. But we're adding something. We're adding something the horse wants, like giving a treat for standing still. The more you add something the horse wants and reward the standing still, the more standing still you'll get. That's the power of positive reinforcement, that the more you reward and add something the horse wants, the more you get more of the behaviour that you're rewarding for. Positive punishment, that's just adding something unpleasant so that the behaviour decreases. So an example of that would be applying a slap for biting. Your horse goes to bite you, you immediately apply a slap. The horse then decreases that behaviour, hopefully, because it associates it with something unpleasant being added. Negative reinforcement, that's just removing something unpleasant so the behaviour increases. That's really the way most horse training works now. So in the conventional world, the way that people train horses is that they remove something unpleasant that the horse is finding that it doesn't really like at the point when the behaviour occurs, so the behaviour increases. So an example of that is to stop tapping the leg or the hoof after the hoof is lifted. So the horse learns to associate that when the tapping stops, because it's done something, that something that it finds unpleasant ceases. Okay, and then lastly, in the 4 quadrants, we have negative punishment, which is just removing something pleasant which means the behaviour decreases. So for instance, taking away food when a horse is nipping, and we'll talk about the risks of that in a moment. Negative reinforcement, pressure and punishment activate survival pathways. This is the part of the brain where the horse is focused on avoiding discomfort or something it has found uncomfortable in the past. The horse it's not focused on engaging. And although horses trained in this way may be obedient, they produce a very different outcome to a horse trained using positive reinforcement. The risk with pressure-based training, based on negative reinforcement, is that it must escalate to teach the horse that it must avoid the pressure. Escalation of this pressure often becomes the go-to to communicate with the horse, and this is easily tipped into the realm of positive punishment. It is why this training can be so effective in skilled hands. The threat of escalation is always present. In fact, it might have gone before and we didn't see it. All we see is the end result, an obedient horse. But it's also why it can go wrong and tip into punishment, which then creates a host of very common behavioural problems in horses. I don't need to describe them. We know them well. Words to describe them through, though, might be lazy, tense, spooky, bargy, reluctant, unpredictable. But both negative reinforcement and positive punishment create learning. It's just that the learning that they create is activated through a survival system. And that system is based on fear, stress, and avoidance. And that is very important to understand when you're choosing a system to train a horse where you want to move away from control that is based through equipment that works on pain. So, what's positive reinforcement and how does it work? Positive reinforcement taps into the horse's seeking system, which is the part of the brain responsible for curiosity and exploration. It's a different part of the brain to the survival part. This system is driven by dopamine, the same system that makes learning feel good. Feeling good about interaction with us creates a confident, engaged horse, a confident, engaged learner whose curiosity drives active learning. So although the learning quadrants are part of the way learning occurs, they create very different horses from an emotional and mental point of view. Because the positive reinforcement trained horse is thinking, what can I do to earn a reward and keep going? Whereas in pressure-based training, the horse is thinking how to stop something. There is no pleasure in trying to avoid discomfort, whereas there is a lot of pleasure in seeking a reward. So this is why these two training methods create such different emotional feelings in the horse. So when positive reinforcement moves into negative punishment, that's a risk. And it's one that we need to be aware of because there is a risk with positive reinforcement. We've always got to be aware of how those four quadrants interact together. So when positive reinforcement tips into negative punishment, remember that's taking away something that the horse wants. Remember, taking away, negative is taking away. This may manifest as them walking away, not trying, or losing motivation. So the horse gives up really because it goes, well, I'm not getting anything, so I'm not going to bother trying. And it perceives that as punishment. And that's a bit like us turning up for work. We go to work, we've been there for a month, and then we don't get paid. If that happens again the next month, you are not going to turn up for work. You're just going to stay at home or go and find another job. So the horse behaving like this, where it loses motivation, it walks away, it stops trying, that's manageable for us. And it might mean that you go back to a bit of negative reinforcement, pressure-based stuff to make things happen. I've been there and bought the t-shirt, and it's why I've banned myself from using a whip. Because for a time I thought that positive reinforcement didn't work, but that was because I was tipping into negative punishment, and the horses would walk off looking like they weren't interested in me. So then I would think, well, I can't make them do what I want, so I'm going to go and pick up the whip, or I'm going to come pick up the rope and I'm going to do a little wiggle or a little bit of pressure. But there's another likely scenario, and this one's happened to me as well, especially with horses who have not learnt emotional regulation around food. And that is that the negative punishment increases tension, it increases mugging and bargy behaviour, and that breaks the trust in the learning process. This is the number one reason people think that positive reinforcement using food rewards is dangerous and not manageable. Negative punishment is kind of used unintentionally by not rewarding until the behaviour we wanted appears. We withhold the food going, you're not doing what I want, and then that turns into negative punishment. From the horse's perspective, something they expected and is very important to them has disappeared. And this will create frustration, especially early on when they don't understand lots of behaviours which do work. So understanding what tips positive reinforcement into negative punishment and training to help horses understand what will work is extremely important, especially in the beginning. And the more you understand this risk, the more you can make sure that training creates calm and trust, because it's always predictable and fair. Plus you won't end up wearing your horse or being bitten or being kicked or something. So, is positive reinforcement just a treat? A lot of people think positive reinforcement is just feeding a treat. Often when a horse finishes and we want to say, yay, you did it. This is very meaningful to us, makes us feel good. But for the horse, it has no idea what the food was for. So it might make us feel good, but it's not effective. So we must make a sound that marks the exact moment the behaviour happens. This is called a terminal bridge. The marker, your click or yes, is what tells the horse exactly what they did right. In reality, the sound can be anything, as long as it's very distinct and not something that you would pop into a conversation or you would say, you know, just as part of talking to your horse, you know, that chatter that we do to our horse. For me as well, I don't want the sound to sound too bonkers, because I go out riding in conventional riding situations, and I know a lot of trainers use a sound like eek, because you're not going to use that in normal conversation or just normal chatter with your horse. But if I go out to a normal situation and I'm riding in a clinic and I keep going eek, people are going to think I'm even more bonkers than I already am. So I prefer to use a quiet sound, which is different from a. So I use the sound, but you can use any sound, it doesn't matter. The sound is just what tells the horse exactly what they did right at that moment. Then the food follows to reward, but it is the marker, the sound, the terminal bridge, if you want to use the scientific term, which teaches. The food reinforces that moment and adds something the horse wants. Remember, positive reinforcement. So it's adding something the horse wants. So it switches on the seeking part of the brain, but the clarity comes from the marker. That's why it's so powerful, because your horse can be doing something quite a long way away from you if you're at liberty, and you can go, yes, that was it. And the marker means that the horse goes, so if I do that again, I will get a reward. Equally in riding, if I'm doing something and my horse doesn't drop its shoulder round a corner, I can click for that and I can repeatedly go, how can I make that happen again? And each time I click, the horse understands that when it didn't drop its shoulder round the corner, when it transferred the weight from the inside front to the outside hind and lifted the shoulder, yay, that was what I wanted. So I stop having to manage that behaviour through my seat and my reins because the horse learns how to move for itself. So the horse hears the marker and associates that with a yes, then the food acts as the reinforcer for that understanding. It means we can mark a precise moment to say yes. And so learning accelerates because we can shape it through very small steps. And I'm telling you now, you'll be amazed at how fast you can teach something to a horse when it understands the positive reinforcement system and it understands that marker and that a reward is coming, something added that it wants. And when we want to build the duration, the length of time that the behaviour happens, we can use a keep going signal to tell the horse they're still on the right track. This is like saying, you're warm, keep going, keep going, keep going. You're getting hotter, you're getting hotter. And then we click, or we use the terminal bridge, and the horse has carried out the behaviour for longer. This is very useful in riding, where the idea is to keep going for longer and longer. All the time, though, we must be on the lookout for the risk of the reinforcement becoming negative punishment. The process must train calm, as this is the first thing you must train to create your bit-free horse. So, calm, that word that I just slipped in at the end there. What about if you don't have calm? Well, I don't think you've got much if you don't have calm. So, let's watch Georgie in action. Georgie started owning me when he was 6 months old. He has only been trained using positive reinforcement. Lots of repetition, building known behaviours through shaping. I have stayed away from using pressure through negative reinforcement. And to stop myself using negative reinforcement, because I do have to police myself because I'm very determined, I've done all his training at Liberty. So he has no experience of pressure-based training. He will be 3 in June and is entire. And this is only the second session this year, 2026, and we're in April now, that I've officially trained him. Other than that, I've just interacted with him on a daily basis with scratches, feeding him his bucket feed, lifting his feet when I want to trim them. Other than that, he's had no actual training. But I did a lot of training with him for the foundational behaviours last year and when we first got him. I want you to notice how calm he is and how much I feed to get that calm behaviour. That calm default is going to transfer into how he is in the saddle and ridden bit free. If you don't have calm, then this must be where your focus is to start. Because without it, you won't have learning. Because stress, frustration and worry stop horses learning. And if you think about it, this is exactly the same as us. In the beginning, when you're training for calm, it's very difficult because we want to go fast, but actually we need to go slower. And it's a bit like watching paint dry, really. And it's a bit like painting. You go, when will it ever finish? I just need to be finished and get my room decorated. But the more of this calm behaviour on the ground, where you develop a system of verbal and visual cues, the more chance you have of calming the saddle and transferring the cues you develop on the ground to the saddle. Bit free is only going to work if the horse understands the communication before you get on and is calm enough to listen to you and keep listening to you. So let's watch Georgie. There's my click, and now I feed. Note how his head is in the middle of his chest. He does not come to me for the food. He understands the food comes to him. That's a foundational behaviour. Now I'm giving him a cue, both verbal and visual, my hands, to say stop. Again, he doesn't come to me for the food. And I'm feeding a lot because that reduces frustration and means that as a young horse, with concentration that's very poor, they all have the attention span of a gnat, he doesn't get frustrated and they don't tip him into negative punishment. Remember, he's got his balls on. Remember, he won't be 3 until June. This time I didn't use the verbal and the visual signal, I just used the click. So I don't always have to do that, and that's what I'm training this year, so I'm only just starting training that. Look how much I feed. And can you see how my hand goes to his mouth? Now I'm training duration and being able to walk away from him and then walk back to him, and he's stationary. That's a foundation behaviour. And you can hear me doing my terminal bridge, that marker that says, yes, you did the right thing. Here's the food. But look at how calm he is. Chewing helps horses to be calm. That's what they love doing, don't they? They love chewing. They love seeking out food and chewing. Here, I want him to move forward. And you might have seen that he put his head down briefly, because a head down is a behaviour he knows, and it can act as something called a start button. But that's for another time. I haven't got time to talk about that. Those foundation behaviours I talked a little bit about when I was talking about what was happening with Georgie. You must create foundation behaviours on the ground to prepare for bitless riding. Bitless riding works on you having very good communication with your horse and also trust. It is not founded on us pulling on reins which are attached to metal, which then presses on the sensitive structures of the mouth. We can't get away with not having good communication skills. So if you are to develop softness and lightness in ridden work, then I think all 11 of these behaviours have to be taught at liberty, on the ground, with no halter or whip. That way, you can't use negative reinforcement because you haven't got a whip to wiggle, and you haven't got a rope to pull, and you haven't got a rope to wiggle the end of, to make things happen. And I know how hard it is in the beginning to retrain ourselves away from the go-to pressure system. And that's why I just banned myself from ropes, halters and whips when training these foundational behaviours. And it's that really that is the most difficult, because we've been taught and had ingrained into us that a whip is just the extension of our arm. But actually, what I think is that we don't realise how that feels to the horse, because we haven't understood those 4 quadrants. How does the horse feel about us using pressure with a whip, which we just call the extension of our arm because it suits our narrative and how we feel about it? But does it tip the horse into feeling that it's been punished, especially when you escalate that pressure? So I just banned myself. That was extremely hard because I didn't have any tools in my toolbox and I had to learn a different set of tools. Of course, that's me. You don't have to do this. You could train all this with a horse and a halter or a cavesson, but I would say it will be a challenge for you not to slip into negative reinforcement. And I will say it'll be a challenge for you not to escalate that slightly. And then, as I've just said, we don't know how horses feel about that escalation. And when the horse thinks it's now punishment, we can't know that because we're not inside the horse's brain. So it's going to be more effective if you can't interfere, because of how it leads the horse to feel, and also because it teaches you to be forced to find ways to help the behaviours happen by setting yourself up, thinking about yourself and thinking about the environment which you're training your horse in. And that helps the behaviours occur that you want to click for. So you need to work out consistent verbal, visual and tactile cues for each of the behaviours that I've listed here. But the tactile cues are only introduced once the horse understands both the verbal and the visual signal. Why is that? Well, because if you introduce a tactile cue before the horse understands the behaviour and associates it with the verbal and a visual cue, I'm telling you now, you will use negative reinforcement because you will escalate the pressure. The tactile cue just needs to be a cue. So the horse does the behaviour. If I want to touch the shoulder, literally touching the shoulder is all I do. Because it's coupled with a verbal cue and the horse understanding the behaviour because of the setup, the environment that I've created, I get the movement without any escalation of pressure. So it isn't negative reinforcement. It's a cue coupled with positive reinforcement. That's probably something hard to get your head around. But as you use more and more positive reinforcement and you force yourself not to have any equipment that means you can slip into negative reinforcement, you come to understand that better and better. The more you repeat these foundational behaviours, the better your horse will be in everything you do, especially if your number one priority is training calmness first, like you saw in Georgie. Like us, horses learn by repetition when they are calm. Repeat these behaviours as tests to see how strong they are. And one thing to understand is that behaviour can be very context based. So when you're at home, where the horse feels comfortable and safe, they'll look solid. Then if you go somewhere else, they may be very weak or even completely fall apart and not be there. That gives you emotional information about the mental state of calm your horse feels. This is just because behaviour, while it's been learned, is often anchored to the place it occurs. Plus, safety and calmness are connected to being able to think and do. You know you are making progress when you can go out and the behaviour is repeatable in different contexts and locations. And this is another reason why these behaviours should be something you return to all the time, because it creates more stable and calm behaviour in different places. They'll become your calm defaults on the ground and in the saddle. Without calm defaults, you have nothing. And I, along with many others no doubt, have been guilty of not realising how much calm I need, because in 30 years of horsing, I had never actually experienced what real calm in horses was. What I had experienced was shut down horses, which stopped thinking and waited for instruction, which I didn't recognise as a horse, which could be triggered into flight at any moment. And when triggered, I would then shut the horse down through control and escalation of pressure. That creates a very different horse to a calm horse listening with a curious waiting mind. So different. Because that calmness and that curiousness and that waiting mind based on trust, based on that seeking brain, is a very special place to arrive at. And you can build it more and more and more. But you must understand those 4 quadrants. So let's go through these 11 foundational behaviours. So receiving food calmly, both standing and in motion. That's what you saw Georgie doing. He could receive food calmly when he was standing, but if you watched and you go back and you watch that again, he could also receive it in motion. So I could put food into his mouth while he was still walking. That takes time to train with a young horse when it's still got its balls on. But it is really, really important for calm. I didn't show it, but he can also touch stationary targets. So one of the behaviours he knows is to go to a cone and touch that cone, or touch a target that doesn't move, and he can walk to that. Why is that important? Because it teaches the horse to move away from you. It gives them another behaviour so that they can go and do that behaviour and you can redirect them. Touching handheld targets. You did see me using a handheld target. I don't know whether you saw him touch it with his nose, because I was using it more for leading, but he can touch it with his nose. I haven't started to teach body parts yet because he's only young, but Gatsby knows about my hand as a target for his ears, for his hip, for his shoulder. Leading and moving together, you definitely saw leading and moving together with Georgie, and obviously at the moment I'm only doing it with walk, but you should end up being able to do it at walk, at trot, at canter. And you can use what's called protective contact. So one side of a barrier when you actually start to do trot and canter, because energy creates, can create more frustration in horses. And I think also energy means we don't click enough, we don't reward enough. That creates a little bit of frustration. And there is an emotional regulation that's needed around you know, when the horse goes into trot and canter and more energy orientated behaviour. Halt. You didn't see me do that, I don't think. But you need to have a halt from a visual and a verbal cue. Okay. Back up. Can your horse back up from a visual and a verbal cue? Can your horse lower its head? You did see that briefly. If you go back, you can see that in Georgie. He offers that as a behaviour when I ask him to move forward. Standing still, we did do that. And you want to develop the amount of time your horse can stand still and the distance between you and your horse that your horse can stand still. And you saw me building that behaviour in Georgie by walking round the back of him. Going to mats independently, you couldn't see, but on the floor there were mats, and those mats help Georgie go to them. They act as a target. And if you use mats well, you can train all sorts of behaviours. So if you go to my Instagram or Facebook page, the Forageplus one, you'll see that I trained Gatsby to jump a course of 6 jumps using mats, and he could go from jump number 1 and jump the course to jump number 6 and land on a mat at the end, because I built the behaviour using those mats. Moving shoulders away and towards, that's a really important skill at liberty to teach, because that's what we want horses to do when we're riding. We want them to move, be able to lift and move their shoulders, and we want them to move the hip away and towards. Again, we're thinking about riding. So we're thinking about moving to riding. So we want the horse to understand how to move its hip towards you, how to move its hip away from you, because that's what we do when we're riding. And we want really to have a verbal, a visual and a tactile cue for when we ride for that to happen. No whip, no halter. I cannot stress how important that is. It's a challenge for us. It's not a challenge for the horse. It's a challenge for us, because we're going to move away from that pressure-based system that is just basically what we've done, because that's the way it's been taught. Very hard. But if you police yourself and you think about what you're doing, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. You've just got to start. Next, calm is developed by the horse not feeling that we're taking away something they want. So this is my recommendation. If you don't have a calm horse, if you feel like you're constantly struggling with your horse trying to mug you, wearing your horse being too close, and you're thinking, how do I get my horse away? You might try and ignore that behaviour, but actually in ignoring that behaviour, the horse gets just more frustrated or ends up walking away. And now you should know why that happens, because you've tipped into negative punishment. Then I suggest you use a pause bucket. Calm is developed by horses not feeling that we're taking away something they want. We do not want to tip positive reinforcement into negative punishment. And if you don't already use this, then incorporate a pause bucket into your groundwork. The horse must know that it has the choice to walk away from you for whatever reason, and there will be no consequence. No chasing. What's the saying? You make the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard. So the horse walks away from us and we get our flag and we chase our horse round and round the round pen until the horse realises that looking you is easy. That is coercion. In positive reinforcement, we want the horse to have a choice. And horses will walk away for lots of reasons, because they're frustrated, confused, tired, either mentally or physically. And we can't know why they walk away. We can only guess. But because we can't know, and because we can only guess, we must allow them that behaviour. We must allow them that choice as sentient animals with feelings. If we are to train trust and calm in all situations, then this is a foundation which must be allowed. The bucket will contain a low-value food such as chaff with hay pellets or even hay, which the horse can go to, so you don't accidentally tip into the risk of negative punishment. Or if you do tip into that, the horse knows that it can walk away and go and eat somewhere else. If it's empty and your horse decides to go to it, you can train distance from you by following the horse, clicking, using your terminal bridge, your marker, and chucking food into the bucket. With Taylor in the picture, he's around the same age as Georgie, and they both came to me at the same time from the same breeder as weanlings. He's found food regulation very difficult. He's a completely different personality to Georgie, and he's easily frustrated. He understands now, though, that the pause bucket can be an activity he chooses, either because he knows it, and that's what he wants to do, which is fair, or because he hasn't a clue what I am asking, or what I am asking is too difficult. We all make mistakes. Being human is to stuff up. But the bucket means the horse has the control to still gain the food reward when we stuff up that is so important to it, because food is what is called a primary reinforcer. So they can redirect themselves, and we can then use that to train calm and distance from us. Might be boring in the beginning, but I'm telling you, the more you train for calm and the more you give that horse the free choice and respect it as a sentient animal, the more calm you'll get, and the more they can think and the more they can learn. Frustration occurring will then reduce because the horse can still think. You don't end up wearing a mugging horse and everyone stays safe. You will, if you've never used this, think a horse will always stand at the bucket. I did. I thought that's crazy. My horses will just stand at the bucket. They'll eat all day until they're a bit full and then they'll stand and go to sleep. I didn't think they'd ever leave, but I'm honestly telling you the opposite is true. And that, I think, is because they would rather earn rewards from me or you, if you use this, and have the pleasure of hearing the click. Remember that dopamine? But I'm telling you now, the pause bucket is fundamental. It's a fundamental part of creating calm, motivation, especially when you and horses first start. But it also continues when you start to teach a horse a new behaviour. Because when we teach a horse a new behaviour or we ask for more energy, sometimes the horse gets tired, mentally or physically, and they can then opt out. They can then go and have a rest and almost reset themselves. Very powerful. What about starting bit-free riding? Perhaps the biggest barrier to taking the bit out of your horse's mouth is how we feel about control. Horses can be flighty, unpredictable animals, and it's drilled into us that the use of a bit is the equipment we must move towards using. Ironically, horses start their ridden education in snaffles, which are supposed to be kind. And as they progress, the bits get harsher and more severe. Just stopping to think about that for a second should make you go, huh? Understand that the default behaviours I have just talked about will be why your basic foundational training will create a calm, thinking horse, which you can ride to start with from the ground, using verbal and visual cues and possibly tactile cues. And once this is established, you can then get on board and do the same ridden. Starting bit free is training those behaviours while you're riding the bit, if you're not confident. And one day you'll realise you are hardly using the reins, and that's the day you can go, I'm ready. Okay, so you don't have to take the bit out of their mouth immediately. You could train the behaviours using a bit. Personally speaking, I wouldn't do that for various reasons. I'd just be in a safe environment, but you could do that. That's especially if you think that you won't be able to stop or lose control and it's not safe, okay? But control doesn't come from the bit. It comes from your training, and it comes from those foundational behaviours that we talked about. Because the horse knows on the ground those behaviours, and that builds your trust and builds your relationship and builds the horse's understanding of that marker, that you can use, or whatever sound you use whilst riding, because you will have made sure they are solid and understood. Before you do anything else now, I want you to get a pen. And if you haven't got a pen, I want you to stop this video and go and get one, because it's really important that you understand about bit pain. I want you to get a pen, and you can see me doing this in the video. And I want you to place the pen on the gum below your bottom incisor teeth. And now press lightly. You'll find it hurts. This is the way Professor David Mellor, one of the world's leading animal welfare experts, illustrates how sensitive the oral tissues are in both our mouth and in the horse's mouth. Professor Mellor has explained the physiology of bit-induced pain in his research paper, Mouth Pain in Horses, which he published in 2020. So relatively recently, if you think about how slow the horse world moves. The uncomfortable truth is, and I'm sorry, you're going to have to accept this, is that bits work because they cause pain. But worse than that, they also cause injuries. They cause ulcers and lesions, bruises, infections, bone damage. And there's no evidence that bits benefit horses. And there is now decades of research which has identified 0 welfare benefits. Bits benefit us so we can control horses. There are only risks to the horse. And don't tell me that you've got good hands, because I'm about to go into that as well. The science shows bits cause physical harm. The organisation, World Bitless Association, have a website, which I urge you to go and look at, which documents the science. Much of this information is from them. 22.7% of competition horses have oral lesions. These are actual wounds. How many more have bruising and tissue sensitivity? In a recent study, 29% of Icelandic horses in competition in Denmark passed the steward test check with oral lesions in the mouth. They passed 29% with oral lesions. And I want you to think about the fact that the oral lesions happen long after tissue damage, which you can't see. So I will leave you to ponder how many of those 29%, well, so there were 29% that had oral lesions, but how many of the rest didn't have lesions but had damage that you couldn't see, which no one looks for anyway, and so no one finds. But it would explain why so many horses get very stressed in bits and don't want to keep their mouths shut. And here I'm going to say that I used to drag hunt and I used to do endurance. And I often used to have to use my reins a lot to control my horse. And I would get back from my drag hunting or from my endurance, and I wouldn't necessarily see any damage on the day, but I can tell you now that over the next week I would see that the corners of the lips would start having flaking skin, and that's trauma. I never looked inside the mouth and I have no idea what was going on in the mouth, but I didn't know what I didn't know, so I mustn't beat myself up about that. We have all been there because we don't know any better. But because the damage is invisible and because it's where we can't see, the pain goes unnoticed. And I'd like to tell you now that if horses yelped, if they whimpered like dogs, if they screamed like us, we wouldn't be using bits, would we? The only reason we use bits is because horses are silent. So what's another problem with bits? Well, bits interfere with breathing. And again, I urge you to read the research if you haven't already done so. As a result of reading that research, I can't and won't ever put a bit in a horse's mouth again. I've abandoned the idea that I can swap and change. And because horses must breathe through their nose, they don't breathe through their mouth, and they must keep their mouth closed for that breathing to be healthy, bits cause a problem even when you're not using them. So even when you're slopping around on a hack with your reins in a smile, not using them, because bits break the mouth seal, this creates reduced oxygen, and that can become a serious risk to the horse. And bits also prevent swallowing, especially when the reins have prolonged contact tension. Oh, I've just seen a spelling mistake. Never mind. This is where you see horses with excessive saliva dripping out of their mouths in dressage competition. The saliva is because they can't swallow. They're literally going to suffocate from that saliva because of the prolonged contact tension they have. Then if you want to read the science of all that, you can go to the resources at the World Bitless Association website. And I'm telling you now, there's masses and masses of science on why bits cause pain and cause problem and are a welfare risk to horses. The uncomfortable truth is that if bits were invented today, they would likely be banned. And that's from Andrew McLean, who's the equitation science man. David Mellor, who's that the most eminent animal welfare expert in the world, says the best bit is the one left on the tack room wall. I would agree with him. All my bits are in my cupboard in my tack room, and I'm pondering what to do with them. I don't want to sell them because I don't want to contribute to the problem of too many bits in the world. Can I make them into toilet roll holders? That's the big question. Why do bits remain today? Because they're just accepted. And the mechanism by which they work is glossed over and ignored. But the reality is that the precautionary principle, you might not have heard of that term before, means that bits should not be used. What's the precautionary principle? It just means that if harm is proven, we must reduce the risk. If harm might happen, we must take the precaution to mean that it can't occur. You can't hack without applying the reins to control the horse when a car comes, when a pheasant flies up, when you want to stop the horse, but the horse doesn't want to stop because it wants to get home because its compass is now operating. Even at walk, we must not wait for the perfect evidence or justify what is essentially medieval tradition. We can't make bits safer, so why are we still using them? If I speak as me, and why I still use them, in that photo of me jumping with Gatsby, why did I still use them? It's because I didn't understand training horses for calm, because I didn't understand those 4 quadrants, but I also didn't understand the emotions and what bits really were. This is the horse world, and sometimes we're happy to be in that bit blind bubble at the expense of the horse because we haven't really thought about it. The alternative is that you listen to me and this and the science and others speaking and realise how the horse feels and how that feeling drives behaviour. And that you go away and you improve your training and your awareness and read the research and show others what's possible. That's what this movement is about. Can we show others what's possible? Because control without pain is perfectly possible. And we must show the world and gather people together to change things. I'm super fired up for this. I'm not interested in forcing horses to do fancy things. My welfare radar now means I am concerned with creating a calm horse who understands, really understands steering, brakes and go in walk, trot and canter and can handle life as a domestic ridden horse in the many varied environments that I ride in. This is about ethics. If equipment works because it hurts, we should not be buying it. and neither should we be selling it second hand. And we definitely should not be using it. So, having said all that, sorry if I popped your bubble. My bubble popped and it's very hard. Which bit-free bridle should we use? There are loads out there, and it's not rocket science fitting them. If you can choose the fit of a head collar, you don't need someone to hold your hand putting a bit-free bridle on a horse's head. But old-fashioned shank English or German hackamores shouldn't be used, and the bosal is too harsh. So if you're into your natural horsemanship bosal, I suggest you kind of reassess that. I love my bosal because it looks like hippie chic. It works really well because it hurts on the bridge of the nose. And it took Gatsby to tell me that after I'd been to a cow working session where I knew I needed more control. So I put the bosal on his head, and then he told me in no uncertain words, if you speak in horse, that he didn't like it when he got back because he kept throwing his head up. And that was after I put him back in my bit-free bridle that's very soft. So rope halters too are, in my opinion, to be avoided, as the knots and the thin rope are not ideal if you pull on them. Plus, I don't think it's ideal to be steering a horse from underneath its chin because it's not very definite. However, I have turned up at clinics having forgotten my bridle, and so riding in a head collar or a rope halter means it isn't a disaster. Yay for that one. When you are choosing a bit-free bridle, you want a broad, soft noseband, 2 fingers from the cheekbones, 2 fingers underneath. Space behind the ears at the poll. I like ergonomic ones, ergonomic bridles that don't interfere with the ear muscles. A loose brow band, which doesn't restrict the ears, very important. A loose throat lash. Make sure the buckles don't press on the TMJ joint or rub. Okay, so your buckles need to be far enough down that they're not interfering with the TMJ joint. Obviously, you need to avoid the eyes. That is the problem with the bosal. Another problem with the bosal, apart from the fact that it's very harsh and not very nice. You don't want the cheek pieces to interfere with the eyes. And you also don't really want something that slips and twists when you apply the inside rein, and then means that the eye on the opposite side is interfered. And what I would say you want to look for is either a wheel hackamore or a side pull. The ones that tighten, like the cross under ones, may work, but my horses actually prefer the other two. But there is one that applies pressure under the chin. So these are the different types of bit-free bridles which the World Bitless Association recommends. And these are the ones which I would direct you to look for. So there's one called a light rider. That tightens and presses under the chin, but releases well, as opposed to the cross under the chin bridle. That's a good option if horses don't like nose pressure. So somebody the other day says, well, I have to use a bit because my horse broke its nose, therefore I can't use a bitless bridle. Bit of a cop-out, if you ask me. They could choose a light rider because that actually causes pressure under the chin, okay? And lots of people report that that works really well. My horses, I didn't find they went as well in it, but that's just my horses, and maybe that's me more than anything. So then we have the Transcend side pull, and there are lots of side pulls. The Transcend is just one that you might choose. It's got a nice broad noseband that's nicely padded, but there are lots of side pulls. Just be careful when you buy a side pull that you look carefully at how broad the noseband is. And then the other thing I would say is how stable is it on the head? Because will it move and twist round and then interfere with the eye? And then there's wheel hackamores, of which the Nolanta is one. And wheel hackamores just basically have this metal wheel. Again, you want a broad noseband. And personally, I would rather see the bridle be more ergonomic than this, because I'm not so sure about the ear muscles there and the way it's interfering with the ear muscles. And then for me, the Buckle is too high up, which is going to interfere with the TMJ joint. I love the oval wheel hackamore. And the reason I love it is because this particular one, which was called the old Bitless, has a very broad noseband with really good padding. The lady who made these sadly decided to stop, which was a real shame because I love it. And it's really good because it's an oval, which means that it can apply simple pole pressure, or you can set it up so that basically it's just a simple side pull, depending on where you put the clip on the wheel. And the wheel is aluminium, so it's very lightweight. And it also works a bit like a fulmer, I suppose, in that it's very definite in terms of the clarity that it gives. When you apply that inside rein, the other side is going to act a bit like a fulmer snaffle. I've created this bridle, the headstall and the brow band to go with it. That's ergonomic in design, so that the buckle doesn't interfere with the TMJ joint, it's below it. And it's very ergonomic around the ears, so you don't interfere with the ear muscles, and Gatsby loves it. So we're making it for sale. As of April 2026, we're still waiting for the samples. I don't know how long it'll take for it to be available for sale, but once it is for sale, we're going to sell it not as a complete bridle, but you can measure your horse's head and decide which cheek pieces you need, which throat lash, which brow band, which headstall, and which size noseband you need. So hopefully that'll fill a gap in the market. Developing bit-free riding. How do we do that? This is where we need another meeting really to get into the weeds about setups which create the behaviours we want, both ridden and on the ground, and how to know if you can go to the beach or the gallops. Can you get to a point where your training in the basic foundation behaviours is so solid that you have enough calm and confidence for the horse to go out and charge across the countryside with 40 other horses? I don't know about that, because there we're overriding the horse and its natural instinct to run as a prey animal. That's probably harder with a horse which has prior history of negative association. But the trust in you, if you build calm behaviour and make that your priority, I think that will override many fears. Calm is king, you see. And thank you, World Bitless, for that saying. Calm is king. Put that in your head and keep repeating it to yourself. How much calm can you get? Because calm is king. Without World Bitless's support, I probably wouldn't be in such a good place with Gatsby, because I wouldn't have realised that calm is king. But if you want to develop bit-free riding, then the Groundwork foundation behaviours are what will set you up for success. You want to teach those rein cues by teaching those foundational behaviours, and then you can transfer those into the saddle. You can teach the backup cues on the ground and then transfer that into the saddle. And once those are solid, you can start to dream up setups. That's just markers and the environment with mats and poles, which will then allow you to develop your steering and your brakes and your transition and walk, trot and canter. But calm is king. And that is what you must always have in your head. So I just want you to watch Gatsby so that you can see what happens when you start to get more and more calm, and your horse is not going to be thinking that when you apply the reins, it's going to mean pain on those sensitive oral structures. Now I wonder why I needed a bit in a horse's mouth, because my horse is so much happier and performs so much better without one. I honestly wonder what it means to carry metal in the most sensitive part of the body, and I wonder at how easily my horse moves over these poles, how his mouth stays soft and closed without a strap or tight noseband. I wonder at the loose reins, allowing him to use his head to balance, letting his eyes look down and place his feet with confidence. I wonder at who he's become now he's free of the bit. I wonder at how he halts, light, willing and without tension. I wonder at the peace in his body, the freedom in his mind. And most of all, I wonder what it truly means to a horse to be free from a bit that controls through pain, and whether your horse too might show you something different if you chose a different way. Thank you for listening. It's absolutely fine to not know. What is not fine is when you know and keep doing things which are unethical to horses, especially when there's a different path which opens a door to possibilities we never dreamt were there. Because we don't know what we don't know until we know we don't know it. Once you do know, that's when you can change. My last tip is to video yourself a lot. That way, you can become your own teacher, because when your horse does something you didn't expect, you'll have the information to look at, and that means you can train better and faster. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.